Town Council, Tuesday, March 21st. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
The United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk.
Councilor Edwards?
Present.
Councilor Janick?
Present.
Councilor Edwards? Councilor Edwards?
Present.
Councilor deMedeiros?
Present.
Councilor Burk?
Present.
Councilor Milbourne?
Present.
Councilor Perry is absent.
All right, so we have had several public meetings concerning this. I did close those meetings at the last time we all met. Today is one of, I really believe is going to be at least two more meetings. This is for the town council to talk about what we want on this ordinance. There'll be no public comment, and I think the council has allowed a lot of public comment over the last few months. We've heard from residents who live in these areas. We heard from residents that own these short-term rentals and non-residents that own these short-term rentals. And now it's time for the town council to put our heads together and create an ordinance. I'm going to turn this over to Councilor Burk, who him and Attorney Marcello has worked really hard on this and put together the original ordinance. And during all the conversations, we do have key points here that were passed out at the last meeting. Councilor Burk.
Thank you, Madam President.
Councilor Burke, if I could just interrupt for 1 second, just to let you know, I was told today that my father has put in the legislation as we requested by resolution.
Great,
Yeah, we
thank you.
found that out
Thank you.
just a few minutes ago.
Thank you, and I know that the Senate version is in as well. Oh, by the way, our town charter, I know it's not on the agenda, but our town charter legislation passed both sides. Now they have to switch over to the respective other sides. So those are moving forward. So, thank you, and we've been at this for 2 years at least. I've had several public hearings, informal public hearings that we had at the, I believe it was at the high school. We've received reams of materials from various folks who run the gamut of perspective on this, some who don't want anything, some who want almost anything as fair game for short-term rentals, and then everybody in between. So it's a lot for us to unpack. This is the first time that we've really had an opportunity as a council to try to narrow things down a bit so that Mike and I will help him can redraft the ordinance that we had sent to the planning board. We also have the planning board's perspective on this from when they reviewed it. And then come back at some point. We probably will have to go through this matrix more than just tonight. If we get through everything on this matrix even tonight, I'd be surprised. And also in the spirit of ensuring that we are awake and attentive, I would like to make a motion first that we limit our discussion tonight until 9 p.m. And certainly so that's the motion. If at some point somebody wants to extend that because it makes sense, then we can take that under consideration.
Second.
Any discussion?
That was good.
And just so folks know, it's just a simple, at some point, if we think that somebody wants that we should extend it, just make a motion for a certain amount of time. I would suggest short increments, but we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Okay, so can you keep an eye, help us? I mean, 9 o'clock is easy, but
I can keep it
I'll
on.
keep an eye on the clock right
I'm right here.
So, again, we passed out this matrix. It's not exhaustive, but I think it covers the key points. And what I would suggest is, and the way I'm going to follow this, is that we go through, we give a sense, we get some level of consensus, if we can, on the key points to give, again, direction to Mike. It may not be the exact verbiage, it won't be the exact verbiage tonight, but at least it will be a starting point. So the first piece is whether or not we want to put a preamble or purpose. Other communities do include that in theirs. I think Warwick was one that I had seen. I don't have that with me. I thought I did. But it basically sets the tone and the stage for why the ordinance, usually trying to balance out desires of those who are not interested in having STRs and those who are interested in having STRs in the community. So any discussion on that piece?
Yeah, I think we should have some sort of preamble. I mean, most state legislation does. It sort of sets the, like you said, it sets the tone and sort of sets you up to understand what you're reading and why it's written the way it is.
Others? And any key points that you think should be in the, I would say making sure that it addresses the intent of the comprehensive plan would be one.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody disagree with the preamble? No. And again, we'll draft it. Okay, so we'll draft a preamble. And that will be part of what we come back for with clearer verbiage. So the next piece, right now, STRs are not permitted use in any zone in Tiverton. The zoning ordinance reads, use is not listed or not generally provided for in the zoning district use table shall not be permitted anywhere in the town of Tiverton. So short-term rentals were not anticipated when the zoning ordinances were last rewritten, and they are therefore not identified. So technically, they are not permitted. We have been loose with that of recent. The current draft language provides an avenue for an STR to be permitted, provided compliance with the ordinance. And then some of the talking points, thought points, again, these bullet points on the right-hand side are not intended to be, oh, this is what we're going to do. It's intended to provoke discussion. So we've had some suggestions to enforce now, to use our enforcement tools now to not allow them. We've had suggestions that they are permitted under the new state law requiring cities, towns to allow advertising of STRs on hosting platforms. I'm going to ask Mike to respond to that in a minute. Question, do we enforce the current zoning ordinance now while we're trying to draft this ordinance? Mike's going to speak to that next piece about the law. And then do we proceed while there is legislation being introduced in the assembly, which would give cities, towns broader authority to license STRs outside of the zoning ordinance? So that was what big piece. Mike, can you speak to the statute that was passed last year, I believe?
Yeah, So we've heard, and it actually has been reported in the Journal, that cities and towns do not have the authority to regulate short-term rentals because of an ordinance, that statute that was passed that's referenced here. I've looked at it, other communities have looked at it. What that ordinance, what that statute really does is saying that cities and towns cannot prohibit someone from listing their STR on a website or a hosting site. That's all it does. In fact, there's legislation now from the original sponsor, I think it's Lauren Carson, to actually strike that language completely from the bill. So there's a little confusion because I think people read that, but the way I read it and the way that most people read it is that it only prohibits cities and towns from passing an ordinance that says you cannot put your housing on a social platform or a STR platform. That's it. That says nothing else about whether or not they can be regulated. And the proof is in the pudding. Newport has regulated. Other communities next to us have regulated it. So to suggest that we can't regulate it at all is just not what the statute says. And that's what we're grappling with now, how to best regulate it. And so right now, I believe our only way to do so is through the zoning code. We're hoping that the legislation passes that also gives us some licensing power with the zoning and licensing. I think we'll have a much stronger ordinance and ability to regulate these. But that's kind of where we're at. So right now, we're just focusing on the zoning part of it. To the extent that the legislature does pass a licensing requirement, that will also help us regulate these as well. So it's a little long answer, but I hope I answered your question.
Madam President, did you have something first?
No, he answered my question.
Okay, Jay?
So Mike, if we proceed in development ordinance, which would incorporate, let's say, special use permits, and then subsequently the state comes back and says, no, you can regulate them with a license, what would the effect be?
So the proposal, as we have it it says, in addition to the zoning, notwithstanding the zoning regulation, you can also do it by licensing. So it's a combination.
So we could put that in there to cover both.
Correct. Well, the statute, if passed, would allow us to do both, correct?
And regardless, let's assume that the statute passes that allows for licensing, we would still have to designate where through the zoning.
Correct, right.
Yes.
Right, you still regulate the location of the zone.
Well, we can do that anyway.
Correct.
Right, but either or, we have
There's-
to do that.
But there are some people who say you can't do that because of that statute that's been passed
Well, I
before.
agree with you. It only addresses the ability to advertise.
Correct.
Nothing else.
Correct.
Other questions on that point, and then I'm going to pose a question to all of us. And I think I know the answer. Is there anyone here tonight on the council that wants to stop STRs dead in their tracks right now? Okay. Okay. So we're clear with that. And we believe we should proceed now with this, even with that. Anybody who doesn't think we should proceed now with this, John?
Counselor Edwards, I disagree wholeheartedly with this attempt to regulate it, and quite frankly, I was waiting to figure out when I would have the opportunity to speak, since up until this moment, I haven't had a chance to actually share my opinions on this, so.
Because you haven't been present, make
Well,
that
because,
clear.
with all due respect, Madam President, because you held this meeting when I asked you to move it, and you declined to do so. So, at some point, I would like to share my thoughts. I don't know when the appropriate time is. I will
We'll go
defer.
through each section, and certainly if it's appropriate for that section, share them. And John, other than, most of us have listened a lot. We haven't had a discussion like this amongst ourselves, so certainly others have had that opportunity. So, but you're suggesting that at least at this point in time, you think we should not proceed?
Correct.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So, permanent zones. So this is a big one, and if you look, you really have to look at this, I think, in conjunction with the top of the second page, which is the special use permit. So right now, again, there's nothing that allows them anywhere. There has been written and verbal testimony of excluding certain areas. Some have suggested no residential zones. Some have suggested specific residential zones, such as, and I want to get the terminology right, such as the waterfront district should not permit them. So the question is, do we want to provide any guidance on zones to consider to allow or to not allow? Madam President?
I think when you look at, I think the zoning is a combination with a lot of things. If you look at whether or not we're going to allow off-street, on-street parking, and I believe we should only have off-street parking for these SDRs, because a lot of residents are complaining about the parking on the streets and they can't get by the streets, and there's some areas that are very congested. So I think when you look at the zoning, you have to look at what else we want. If we decide no on-street parking, then we need to look at the areas where where that will work. These homes that don't have areas where you can park on the property, then if we decide on-site parking only, then we need to look at those zones where it's very congested, where there's a small area to park. That's, I think a lot of this, like, I think before we go to zoning, we really should discuss what else we would like, because I think that would help us restrict the zoning. But it's, I don't know if everyone agrees.
Deb?
So we've heard from a lot of people, and we had a group on this side of the room who have run good businesses, successful businesses, and they've had off-street parking. They've been attentive to their property. They've been attentive to their neighbors. There's not been trash violations. We haven't had police at their presence. I think that should be the standard that we strive for, is look at all the components that make them successful. On the left side of the room, we've had people who've had issues in their neighborhoods, and a lot of it was around the parking. A lot of it was about the loud behaviors and the weeknight parties, people not adhering to the noise ordinance, not adhering to the fire ordinance. So maybe we need to look at, like, the ordinances and ensuring that people are abiding by that. Mrs. Welchman, one of the realtors, gives out a form that you can do this, you can't do that. And although I think that's best practice, I don't think we can require that people do that. But if the owners know these are the requirements and they hold their renters accountable to that. You can't set off fireworks in the middle of the night. You can't have cars all over blocking the streets.
Parties.
You can't have these big parties. And if their renters continue to do that, then they don't rent to them again. So we put the onus on the owners, and I think the majority are great owners and have run good practices, good businesses. So if we look at what our ordinances already are and hold them accountable, I don't think that people need to live on the property necessarily. I think they need to either be within whatever time frame to get to that property if there's an issue, or have somebody assigned who we know, so that if there is an issue, that person can be contacted and they can show up on the property. But I don't think that we punish the group of good business owners for those others that were disturbing to the neighborhood.
So I'm going to call on John in a second because I know he's waiting, but I want to suggest after that we shift from permitted zones down to some of the other items and come back to that. John? You look like you were going to say something.
Continue.
Okay. Definitions, it only defines the term dwelling unit, but contains certain exclusions under the current as tents, campers, RVs, lean-tos, and also excludes properties that are served by cesspools. And I want to note that right now, camping is not a permitted use in town anywhere, I believe. Michael, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah. So some municipalities have specific restrictions that do not permit designated affordable housing units to be used as STRs. Some indicated that accessory units and accessory family dwellings can't be used for that purpose, and the question is, because this has come up from some of the letters and the like that we've received, should we exclude properties that are served only by private wells? So I think is, are we comfortable with that current terminology about dwelling unit? And B, do we want to address any of the items or other items that aren't listed to the right of that? So I'm going to take a moment then. One comment here is, I've heard in testimony that, we're in, I'm going to paraphrase this, that we're regulating something that is not an issue. And I would wholeheartedly disagree. I think we're being proactive. And I bring that up because of the affordable housing piece. There are many communities, large and small, across the country and in other countries that have seen negative effects of short-term rentals on property values and on renting, and have pushed people out of areas that are generally accessible financially for folks with moderate or low incomes, because they've had an overabundance of short-term rentals. So I think that's something we do want to consider. I'm not sure of the exact language, but I would put that on the table for consideration. John, and then Denise.
So, again, because I haven't been present in these discussions, but I have watched the video and, reviewed minutes and so on and so forth. Is it the council's opinion that there are specific areas of concern? Meaning, is this the current issues that we're facing, the issues with the STRs that have been brought to the council, are they in a specific region of the town, or is this townwide?
You want to?
There's been certain regions, I think if you watch the tape, Riverside Avenue is one of them because of how congested it is. And there's, I don't know if you heard, there was one time people parked and a bus came to the area, picked up everyone and brought them to the wedding. It was very disruptive to the neighborhood because there was nowhere to park. There was a lot of people present and it was loud. So, like I said before, it seems like the very congested areas are where we're hitting the most problems. Also, and I don't know if I should bring this up now, but some of these houses are putting 15 people in them where their septic is only the 3 bedrooms. So if we restrict it that way to say that if you have a house that has 3 bedrooms, you should only have 6 people there. That would help that problem because they wouldn't be able to put all these people in one home. So I think we could solve some of those problems by looking at the rules we have in place now, that these septics can only have the amount of occupants that it was approved by DEM. And I think if we did something like that, and I think the short term, I think the rental people would be fine with it, most. That's been the major problems that I've gotten phone calls to my house. And also we heard from a few people that have expressed that. And like Deb said, it's the people that aren't following the rules, that are overcrowding the house, that's having people, allowing people to have parties there. We had one short-term rental that had a big bridal night there. So that's disturbing to a neighborhood when there's 20 people there till 2 o'clock in the morning, and then they all stay in the house. So I think if we look at it that way, we could help with some of these disturbances. Did that answer your question a little?
That does, thank you. And just as a follow-up to that, one of the things that most concerns me with the whole notion of this STR regulation is, this isn't my first go-around on the council. This is, I guess, 2.5 terms, I guess you could count.
Something like that, yeah.
Yep. And what I've noticed over the years, especially with the town of Tiverton, is that when there's a neighborhood-specific issue and the town gets sucked into something around that, the town generally loses, and we lose primarily through exorbitant amounts of legal fees we have to spend defending ourselves, getting involved in a matter that really shouldn't involve us. And so my trepidation around this whole STR regulation is if it's being driven entirely by a specific neighborhood, is the town of Tiverton getting sucked into yet another neighborhood issue at the expense of the entirety of the town?
So I'll respond to that. First off, your earlier question was whether or not the council had considered specific neighborhoods. Again, I'm paraphrasing. The council hasn't considered anywhere specifically. We have heard feedback, both pro and con, or somewhere in the middle of STRs. We have heard from specific neighborhoods, both in person as well as written. Those neighborhoods are in various areas of the town. The waterfront district on Riverside is one, and they've been very clear about what their concerns are, and also have been very clear that the operators of those are not bad businesses, but it still negatively affects their quality of life. There's locations in the south end of town where there's been issues around parties. There's been concerns raised by property owners about wells and private wells in the water table down there, and how, for the most part, and I don't live down there, so I'm not familiar with it, they're concerned that folks who are renting will not be as responsible with their use of water as others who don't. And then the last thing I'll put on the table, and we've not discussed this, is I just want us to think about when we bought our own properties in town, in residential neighborhoods. Did we buy them thinking that the neighborhood could be turned into a transient neighborhood? And I'm not talking renters for a year or whatever. I'm talking every weekend for much of the year, or at least through the summers, where people are coming and going and changing what you bought into. So I think that needs to be considered, because I think most people in Tiverton did not, who are homeowners, did not buy their homes for it to become a hotel row. Because really, I know people don't like to hear this, but STRs are hotels because of the transient nature of the population, of the renters. So I do think that we owe that to all of us, all of our residents, to consider that. So the question again is, do we want to give any further direction on the, at this time at least, on the dwelling unit definition? And I do want to note that definition does specifically exclude from being used as STRs any properties that have cesspools, because those are substandard ISDS systems. And eventually, everybody with this.
Speak up a little bit, please.
I said anybody who has, it excludes properties that are served, that have only cesspools, the definition right now, because those are substandard ISDS systems, and for the most part will eventually have to be modified by the owners. Did you have something, Tom?
Yeah, just a follow-up point on that, because there are segments of the town where Rhode Island DEM has granted leniency to replacing cesspools, most notably Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the wastewater project. So I would have some concerns around excluding something that the state on the ISDS side has explicitly continued to allow, that have said they don't need to be replaced. And by the way, from the state's perspective, all of those cesspools do need to be replaced.
Right.
It's just a matter of finding out who owns them and then enforcing.
Yeah, eventually they do. Jay?
All right, septic systems. The state definitely wants to, as we do, remove all cesspools. The state has granted leniency in certain areas where we have a project on the books to put in a sewer system. They don't want to require a property owner to spend $15,000 on a new septic system and then 2 years later be required for another $15,000 to be tied into a town sewer system. That's the only exception. So right now, if you have a cesspool and you sell your property, you have exactly 1 year to upgrade it, either you or the purchaser. There's no leniency on that. We, as a town, cannot exceed the DEM septic system permit, and that's based on bedrooms. So if you have a house that has 3 bedrooms, you're going to apply for a septic permit. You're going to send them all the details, and the state's going to approve it or not. If they approve it, then it's only approved for 3 bedrooms, end of the story. And they assume and expect that there'll be 2 people in those bedrooms. So that system is now sized for 6 people. Period. So if you decide to open an STR and you want to bring in 10 people and have them sleep there, you're in violation of your ISDS permit. The town cannot exceed it on its own. We can't say, oh yeah, but we're going to let you do 150%. It's not in our purview and we shouldn't be doing it. We need to be very cognizant of the fact that the state is very interested in low-income housing, and one of the ways they want to address that is to sort of preempt local zoning and require us to allow accessory units on a property, on a parcel. So that would be like a house with maybe a grandmother house in the back. It's going to be using the same septic system. It's going to require that septic system to be upgraded. So our ordinance needs to, I won't call it eventuality. I'll call it a certainty that's going to happen. So we need to pay attention to that.
Did you?
No, I just wanted to say to John, yes, some of these houses do have cesspools, but we just don't want these cesspools overtaxed. And that's the question. If a short-term rental, we say you can only have 6 people, well then 6 people are allowed. Because if not, then we're gonna overtax this, and we already have a problem in the north end with some of these. So I just feel we do need to regulate that, and we need to be very conscious about these cesspools. Because some of them, like you said, the state's given some leniency, but they're not working really the way they should. So we have to be careful with these homes with cesspools to make sure that they're not being overtaxed.
I'm going to ask John and suggest that if you would like to send some potential language to the solicitor for us to look at the next time around, to address your concerns with that, will that work for you?
Yeah, happy to do so.
Okay.
And just as a follow-up for the rest of the council, I believe out of all of us, I may be the only one who has most recently had a house with a cesspool. So, with all due respect, I understand that how the systems work, and ultimately, if you put too much into it, you have to pump it more frequently. So,
Yeah.
just that note. And for Councilor Edwards, I love the lowball estimate of $15,000. It was $21,000 when I had to replace mine, and that was the contractor being very nice because he underestimated the job.
And it was some years ago.
That was
Couple years?
3.5 years ago.
Pre-COVID.
So Councilor Edwards is going to send some language on that. Do we want to consider potential language on whether or not accessory units of any type should be permitted use?
Accessories such as,
Accessories
I would say no.
could be accessory family dwelling units. That's an important piece, because an accessory unit, if I'm right, can be something attached,
right.
or
And now
can
there's
be,
a movement to make it detached.
right, and can be something detached.
So-
But the detached movement is to address affordable housing.
Correct. But,
Can you explain that?
yeah,
Like, you're talking about like a duplex or?
So if I have a house, what am I gonna put there that's an accessory unit?
A little
Just
cottage.
another cottage?
right.
Yeah, a little,
It's limited to it's limited to, I think, right now, I think the law is, and don't quote me on this, is 20,000 square feet. You need a 20,000 square foot lot, at least. If your town doesn't have enough affordable housing, it allows it almost as a right. And maybe John can help me out. That's last year's legislation.
it didn't pass, though.
I think some form of it did pass,
Oh, did
yes,
it?
yes.
Okay.
The controversial one that's coming up is garages, right? So now they're allowing people, if the bill passes, to allow people to convert their garage automatically, without any regulation by the town, to automatically allow that to be converted into a accessory unit. Or, as you said, have a house on a lot and you want to build something detached.
But my question is, they still have to comply to DEM regulations with
They're going to have
I
to
assume,
reapply.
I assume that, but I can't say that for certain. I would assume, yes, if you're not hooked up to a sewer, you need to have enough.
Right.
So you're talking, you can convert your garage into
The proposal,
not an extra bedroom, like a.
Whole new
an
house.
apart- A whole
yeah.
An in-law.
In-law.
bathroom.
And a lot of people
kitchen.
do that, but there's a lot of rules and regulations locally about that, and in Tiverton, your accessory building has to be on your lot.
Yes.
So that could change.
But part of this is, our zoning, you also have lot coverage.
Right.
So you've got a principal dwelling, and now the state says, oh, well, we're going to allow you, whether the town likes it or not, to put in an accessory unit in the backyard,
And,
which
and, over,
effectively
and,
does away with coverage.
and override the lot coverage,
Right.
correct?
But
That's-
then, I can't imagine that they would not require a new septic permit.
That's beyond us.
Oh.
Well, I don't think we should allow accessory units
Well, and
As a use for an SDR.
right.
as a use for an
Because
SDR.
my concern is, again,
Yeah.
it's intended, the legislation is really intended to help with the affordable housing crisis. It's not intended to create an opportunity for an STR,
So
so.
rent, right, so if you, following, sorry, Mike, sorry, Council Mike's, so it's intended to help have more housing on smaller lots, basically, right? But if you're allowing that place to be built and then renting out on a weekly basis, you're not really helping the affordable housing, because you're using it to generate revenue, so.
But what about a duplex? You live in one side and
Yeah,
that's,
that's designed that way,
okay.
yeah.
It's all right.
So, yeah, so.
Well, that's
so
just
we'll-
my opinion,
We'll
AJ.
come back with some language around not allowing accessory use units, either detached or attached, to be used for this purpose. The next question, and I'm not even sure how we would do this, I certainly understand the concerns that folks have, but excluding properties served by private wells, I guess we probably know who they are. That would be a big swath of. Yeah.
I think the concern around that is that there's 10 people there for a whole week, and they're worried about I think it's the overcrowding issue, what I'm hearing from the residents down there. Overuse, too many people in the house all summer long. That's what I hear. Not if we decide that you are allowed to have a short-term rental for the amount of people your septic will allow. I think that would make those people a little more comfortable about it. I think it was just houses that have 10 people there all summer long.
I'm not so sure legally we could
I don't know
make a
if we
distinction
could.
between a public system and
Right,
a private
I
well
don't
system,
know
as
if
long
we
as the
could.
well is potable water
Right.
and it services the house, but I think you get around that by limiting the number of
By
people that can
limiting
be
the amount of
per
people.
the bedroom.
Right.
Okay, so for now, do we want to leave that alone?
I think that would be almost impossible
I just
to.
don't think we can do it.
So now we go to the question of owner occupancy or not. So right now, the language in the proposed ordinance is must occupy the same dwelling unit or reside on the same lot for 180 days annually, or live in Tiverton within a 3-mile radius of the property. It must own the STR property for 5 years before it can be used as an STR. I'm going to ask the solicitor again to speak to a couple of these points that I think are well-intentioned. Certainly, my intention in throwing some of these ideas out there was well-intended. At the same time, it may be something that we would end up having more legal battles over. And we may be able to address that in the fee structure too. Michael?
So I believe the owner occupancy could be something that we could enforce. However, the have to live in Tiverton, probably not. Have to live within a certain miles of Tiverton, probably not. We're interfering with interstate commerce and those, so,
But could we put in respond time?
right.
So you don't have to live in Tiverton, but if we need you, could we say they have to respond in a period of time?
And the other, yes, and I believe the other issue that I have a concern with is the 5-year ownership as
Yeah.
well. Whether you have,
Yep.
So these
Could do that,
these
or
are constitutional issues that I don't think you can do that, no.
And I believe you and I discussed earlier about, because some have suggested, I think we have a letter that was sent to us recently suggesting that we only allow persons, not corporations like LLCs, to operate.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, from my perspective, for other reasons, when the Supreme Court opined on campaign finance, so a decade or so ago, they identified that corporations are people. So I
I don't think we could limit the ownership of a piece of property to an individual at all. Not because of that ruling. Corporations have been considered people for a long time under Rhode Island jurisprudence.
Yeah, I'm going to go Deb first and then
Oh, I
Jay.
didn't
and
even see
then-
Deb.
So I did hear from two different people, same kind of circumstances. Military purchased a home here and are traveling with the military, but plan to return here. That was one. One is in and out of the town, and for them to have to be in their home for a certain period of time would be a hardship. So as I was thinking about this, what if you worked for Pepsi, you know, and you were in Japan for a year and then came back and you wanted to rent out? I think that we should not have that restriction, that people need to live here, because what is it that we're trying to accomplish? We want to make sure that if there's a problem, there's someone who can respond in a timely manner. So if they are going to be out of state, out of the country, wherever, if they can have a local person who is their designee, who can be contacted in case of an emergency and be responsible. And, you know, if they do some kind of application, that person's on there. So they're listed, we all know who they are, and they understand what their responsibilities are. I think that's more important than having someone live right there, because I don't think that that happens now, and I don't know that it's required, because I think we've had some good businesses where they are not living on the property or in the home. So, just my opinion.
So, John, did you have the mic up? Did you want to speak too? I wasn't sure.
No, but I'm happy to.
Okay. Sure.
The only point I would make on this is, I don't think you can, as the solicitor said, have an owner occupancy requirement. And then as far as, having somebody responsive, any good organization that purchases these to rent them out is going to have a property management company. I think we're just spinning our wheels on this thing.
Jay and then Denise.
Can we limit the number of STRs that an individual can register and operate?
Under current law, no. The proposed legislation would allow the city and towns to limit the number of licenses that they could be given out. Now, whether you could limit it to a person or not, but you could set a limit of the licenses that would give out. But you can't restrain someone from buying property right now for their use. If they want to spend $1 million and buy 6 houses, that's their right, and turn them into SDRs, so.
No way to mitigate that?
No.
So if you have, let's say in the town of Tiverton, 100 licenses,
100, well, we don't have a license, we don't have the
No.
ability to license right now.
let's just say 100 permitted or,
Yeah.
special use permits as it would be now. And they all line up at that door on January 1st. We could lose 50 of them to what are really property businesses.
I mean, this is what
Not
this
these
is.
folks out here.
Well, if you could limit it, but we can't limit the number right now.
Right.
We gotta figure that out, because that's gonna be a problem, I know it is. The other thing too is, okay, I don't necessarily agree either that we require them to actually live in Tiverton, but for me, I would want a response time of an hour, not 12 hours. And the reason I say that is, you have a problem at a property, and if you give people 12 hours to respond, the problem's not only gone, they're probably back home in New Jersey.
I'm going to ask that we get to the response time later and focus on the owner
Well,
occupancy and the
yeah,
like.
I mentioned it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'm real concerned about opening this thing up to people that just buy houses to rent them.
Denise?
John, I do want to mention that we have responsible people do respond, but we have had we've had a couple of problems where we've had problems at the house and we could not get in touch with the owner for days. So it does happen, and that's why if we have someone's name and that person doesn't respond, I think some action needs to be done if that happens, some kind of fine, because it has happened in town, where the police were there trying to get in touch with someone and they couldn't. So I think, yes, some of the responsible owners, definitely, they answer the phone, they take care of the problem. But we have had a few problems where they haven't. I don't think, we're talking occupancy.
Yeah.
I don't think that an owner should have to live there. But I do think if an owner does live there, the fee structure should show that. So the fee structure should be lower if you're there renting out a room, or we have a couple people to rent out a little area. I think the fee structure should be less because if we have a problem, they're right there. And they will be able to monitor the trash. They will be able to monitor how many people are there or whether there's parties there. So I think if it's owner occupancy, the fee structure should be a lot less. I don't think a person has to live in Tiverton. I think as long as the response time is an hour and the answer is, if they're traveling all over the place, then as long as we have somebody managing the properties, it doesn't have to be the owner, as long as we have a contact person.
I was just gonna say, that, is it any way we can increase the fees on said corporations if they come in and purchase multiple homes?
Yeah, can we get to that?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay, because I think that's an important topic to focus on.
That's just reflecting on,
Right.
well, we can't stop on,
Right.
so,
Right.
okay.
Right. So, just one other piece on this. Well, some may think that, at least from my perspective, the owner occupancy isn't just about response. It is about trying to have some more control over how these are created in town. So that would add a level of control. I do hear, though, that there seems to be some consensus that we modify the owner occupancy in a way that recognizes those properties where the owner occupies, probably with a different tiered fee system than those that are non-owner occupied. John, did you have something?
Yes, I just have actually a question for the council. Since we're talking about short-term rentals, I'm curious to know how many on the council have utilized either Airbnb or Vrbo or something similar ever?
Sure, but I don't think that's relevant to us
I mean,
regulating them. I'm sure if those communities want to regulate how they use Airbnbs and STR, any type of STR, they're welcome to do that. I have used them. Personally, I prefer a hotel, but
So do I,
if
but
need be, I've used them.
anybody else? Okay. Just curious.
I've never
But
used
not in this country.
But
Go ahead.
I don't think that's the issue though, because those communities probably do have regulations. And they're comfortable with how they're doing it. We want everyone to be comfortable in how this is going, the owners and also the residents.
And some communities that did not have regulation are now kicking themselves for not having regulation and having to go back and redo that. The other piece is in this is going to come out, be heard in a different way, and I understand that some people may have jobs that take them away from home for periods of time. This does not in any way restrict somebody from renting their home as something other than an STR. So an STR is defined in here as, what do we say, 30 days or less. So anybody can rent their home for 31 days plus, and it's not covered by this, okay? So then occupancy. So I'm just going to reframe a bit what I think I've heard, and we might be able to get through this more quickly, this piece more quickly. So right now, we define it in the draft as 150% of the sleeping capacity as defined by the building official. Various places do this, what's described here, that they limit the number of occupants to the number of bedrooms, which has been discussed here, and only 2 people per bedroom, and the number of bedrooms being further defined by the approved ISDS system. So if I have a 3-bedroom house, I can have no more than 6 people in that house. Now, if I'm renting part of my house as an STR, as one of the bedrooms, that takes up 2 people. Then I can have 4 on the other side with a family, so to speak. So that is one suggestion I think that I've heard folks interested in on the council. John?
Can you define when you say people? And the reason for the question is, so here's a real-world example. My wife and I, we have 3 kids. We go away up to New Hampshire, let's say, with, my mother and father-in-law. Are we 4 people, or are we 7 people? I've got a baby that's under 1. Does that count as a person? I'd just like to know what the
Well, I think
specific
we can
definition
define that. I mean, I would
is.
define it as anybody, regardless of age. I think that's easier, for 1, to track. For 2, while I recognize that kids don't take up a lot of space, in some ways they may overuse some of the facilities.
Or
than
not at
others.
all, in
Or
the
not
case
at
of
all.
a,
Yeah, in the case of an infant.
6-month-old
But, I mean,
or a
that's up
2-year-old.
for discussion. So, if you want to propose something, feel free.
We could always put any, like above a certain age is a person. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but like, say a 2-year, below 2 or even higher, below 5. But we still have to worry about septic, and I understand
Unless they're in diapers.
some of these kids are in diapers, so you're not gonna worry about that.
And the follow-on question to that is, again, let's say, we have the baby sleep in, pack and play in the same room, and it's me and my wife and the baby, but there's only 2 allowed into a bedroom. I mean, is the building official going to come knocking and tell us
No,
we're in trouble?
No, it's how you
No,
measure
we're
the
not.
number allowed.
We're not gonna go in the house and look in the bedrooms and see who's sleeping in the beds. I think that's a little bit over.
Yeah.
I
Jay?
think. I
Jay,
don't know.
I agree.
Just to be clear, this is not about space. This is about, the driving factor for this is the capacity of an on-site wastewater system. And I will submit that a baby taking a 35-gallon bathtub bath uses more than my 5 gallons in the shower. So yes, they should be counted as a person.
So let me suggest that we won't necessarily do it now, but Mike and I will look at some of the other cities and towns on how they define that and come back with a proposal on whether, what that might look like if we didn't count each individual as a person.
Say adults.
Okay? Are we okay with that? Okay. Mike, you have a note on that, because I don't have a note.
I got it.
Yeah, okay. So the state registration requirement, that's pretty straightforward. They have to register with the Department of Business Regulation. Moving on to page 3. So this is another key point. So right now, we limit parking to the requirements of the Code of Ordinances, Article 10, Section 1, which is 1.5 car spaces for each dwelling unit. In residential zones, parking must be met with off-street parking. So the question before us is, do we want to limit parking, and how do we want to limit parking? Do we allow only off-street parking? And do we further, if we allow only off-street parking, specify that it must be on that same parcel of property? John?
So I think there's a very easy fix, has nothing to do with this ordinance. If there's an issue with off-street parking or limited parking, we can very easily ask the chief of police to go in and to make an area, by, parking by, resident permit only.
We've talked about
I think we're spinning our wheels on this one too.
We've talked about that.
So like as a follow-up, I mean, with Riverside Drive, if Riverside Drive is an issue and there's no off-street parking, then just, boom, you have to have a resident sticker to park on the street. And then if not, the police come down and they ticket just like they do on Industrial Way.
Denise?
Yes, we have talked about that, but if we do allow that, then there's no off-street parking for the STRs. There's no, I keep saying off-street, on-street parking for the STRs, because they're not going to have that little sticker.
Well,
You
and
can't pass the sticker around.
extension, there's no on-street parking for anybody who doesn't have a resident sticker. So, you know, the rules should apply equally to all. So
Yes.
if it's a given neighborhood and, let's say, the administrator is from Massachusetts and he goes down to visit somebody on Riverside Drive and he parks on the street, well, good news, you're getting a ticket if the police come by. I think that should just be equally applied to those specific areas, and we don't even have to do it within the confines of specifically singling out, you know, one specific use.
Which, to me, is the exact reason why to limit it, because when somebody's having a holiday celebration with their family, a cookout, et cetera, they should be able to do that in their own home. They should be able to have people who are coming park on the street. This is a different use. And I know folks don't like it when I use this term, some folks. This is a hotel. Hotels generally have to have parking lots. We're not talking about a parking lot, but I think we should stick to, personal opinion, it's whatever the council comes up with, only allowing off-street parking. Deb?
I agree with you. My question is, must it be on the same parcel? So does that mean I own this parcel and that's where my house is, but I own the vacant lot next to it? Can I not use that for parking?
Yeah, and that's not, so that little note there is not what's in the current draft. That's just what some have suggested.
Because why would we stop somebody from using their own parcel of land?
We could.
Why could we?
No, I said we could let them use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could let them use it, as long as it's their land, yeah.
Right.
Just from a policy perspective, so where the homes are most desirable, like usually on the water, are the areas that have the fewest parking spaces, right? Because the lots are close together, right? So you're not gonna have a short-term rental in the middle of the forest. You might find one in Tiverton somewhere, but most people want to be in the water, right? That's where they come to Tiverton. They want to have a nice view. So that's the kind of thing you have to figure out. I mean, some people buy houses and they just want the view, and they want to have their house, but they don't want to have, they want to be able to park. And then they have the guy next door, or the person next door, you know, renting out every 30 days, and that's a problem. So that's the policy issue that you have to decide as a council. How do you do that? And I think there was a person who did testify, I forget what district he lived in, that, you know, his neighborhood has turned into a problem because he can't park. It's a catch-22, because the area where most people want to go is people that have the fewest parking spaces, because they're on the water. Sorry.
John?
Yeah, and I would also posit that I think this might be incongruous with how we regulate other businesses. I mean, since I was sworn in on this council, we've heard that you can't use ancillary lots even if you own them for parking for specific events. So, you know, I think we can't be picking and choosing, you know, who we apply regulations to and who we don't. It needs to be a broad brush if we're going to target them because they are a business, as Councilor Burk has pointed out, or a hotel, as he put it. And then the other follow-up point to that would be, one of the other reasons why I've heard tonight that we have an issue with short-term rentals is because there's, you know, 10, 15 people coming over and having a party. And I would ask how that's any different from any one of us having 15 people over to our house to drink beers by the fire until 2 a.m.
Because you don't do it every day.
Denise and then Deb?
First of all, the businesses, the reason why, and you have heard that they can't use other lots, but that's because other businesses are using that lot. So it's a person that owns 4 or 5 lots where there's businesses, and they can't share or use those lots because those businesses need those parking spaces. As far as having, yes, people have neighborhood parties, but they don't do it every night. And they don't do it, a lot of people are saying, you know, these people rent for a week, they're on vacation, and they're partying until 2 o'clock every night. and some residents have to go to work. Now, most of us are very respectful of our neighbors, and if we have a party, if it's on a Friday night, it's usually not in the middle of the week, and we don't have one every day. So I think that's the issue.
Deb, did you have something?
Well, that's what I was saying to John, it's not every night, so if my neighbor has a graduation party and they're parked all up and down the street, I know it's gonna end. It doesn't happen every day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, different people.
Well, if I could just offer a hypothetical, I purchased a Mega Millions ticket. If I hit that thing, we're going to be partying and drinking for weeks on end at my house. So, I mean, how do you decipher what you're trying to forecast intent on every single situation? And I'm saying that we have to sit back objectively, look at the facts, and apply that to everyone. We should be equal under our regulations. It shouldn't be what some people do that other people can't do. And with respect, I mean, Councilor or Madam President is not here right now, but we have other businesses, and I don't want to run too far afoul, but we have other businesses that have struck up arrangements with neighboring businesses to utilize parking, and we've gone actively after those businesses about not being able to do such. And it happens in the industrial park right now. So I feel like we're trying to thread a needle here, and it's just going to wind up creating consternation for everyone. Like, apply the rules equally to all.
So, John, I may agree with that to a certain extent if we were saying we were not allowing this in residential zones, period. But we are. We do not allow businesses generally in residential zones. They could be passive businesses, somebody doing consulting, something like that. But they can't be active businesses where people are coming and going all the time and need parking. So I think that analogy is a little bit off. I appreciate it, but I think it's a little bit off. And again, these are outside of the norm of what is in a neighborhood that most people in town have bought into that neighborhood because they didn't want to be next to a business that has a transient population frequently.
So just to remind, the problem is that we're trying to fit, the dwelling use is prescribed by code. And the zoning code says if you're a dwelling use, which is a house, it's 1.5 car spaces for each dwelling unit. In residential zones, parking must be met with off-street parking. So our zoning ordinance requires you in a residential zone, if you want to apply this equally, right? So you want to say that a house is a residential zone, a short-term rental, then you have to have 1.5 spaces for each dwelling unit, and it all has to be off-street. That's the law as it is now.
So let's pick on Riverside Drive as an example, where there are no off-street parking. So if we enforce that, then the residents who own houses there technically don't qualify.
Yeah, I'm assuming that they were grandfathered in because they pre-existed this probably, so that's the
A
issue.
lot of these places.
The
residents, yeah. But under the code, that's what's required. So in a residential zone, you gotta have all off-street parking, and it's 1.5 car spaces for each dwelling unit, so 1.5 cars per unit. That's the code now.
What's a half car look like?
Well, John rounds it up to 2.
A mini.
And then if you go to,
motorcycle.
and
Mini Cooper.
if you go to a hotel or motel, which I know this is not a quick,
Holiday Inn?
a hotel is 5 car spaces plus 1 space for each unit, room or suite. So 5 to begin, plus 1 for every other suite. That's a hotel motel. So, we're trying to fit something in that was not anticipated when the code was written, right? This is all new stuff.
I don't disagree. I mean, I would say that the vast majority of the code needs to be rewritten, which is why we voted to expend $93,000 or something on rewriting the zoning code. I mean, maybe we're premature on this as a whole if we're going to go through the entire rewrite process.
The question before us, I think, at this point, is a couple. One, do we want to continue, regardless of where we permit STRs, to require each STR to only have off-street parking? Second, do we want to keep the formula that's already used in Article 10, Section 1, which is 1.5 car spaces for each dwelling unit off-street. And then, I thought I had a third question there. Or, and this has been proposed, that do we want to limit it to 1 vehicle per bedroom? Jay?
In my opinion, we should make it all off-street, 1 vehicle, 1 bedroom, 1 vehicle. So a 3-bedroom house would require a minimum of 3 parking spaces. Then we run into the issue, what if the owner also lives there? So maybe it should be 3 parking spaces for 3 bedrooms plus the owner.
Well, if.
Well,
Or
But
not
if
just
the-
do
Go ahead.
1.5, and then just do 2 off-street.
So
So the original, they have, 1.5 on their property and then 2 off-street.
Well, John Hoyle already rounds that up to 2.
On-street, sorry. On-street.
I know, that.
To me, the key is, look, we all moved into a neighborhood. We may have done our homework and, we bought it, we moved there for a specific reason. Who knows what the reason is? Schools, like the looks of the place or whatever. After you live there a couple of years, you know what the ebb and flow of that neighborhood is. You don't expect to come home at night and find, occasionally you will, birthday party, anniversary party, whatever, the Super Bowl. But you don't expect every weekend to come down your street and find out, oh, I can't park on Russell Drive because it's full. I got to go over to Merritt Avenue. You don't expect that. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen.
I think you have to be aware, sorry to interrupt. So you have to be aware that you may be, by having a restrictive parking requirement, you may be excluding a whole bunch of residents that would not be able ever meet the parking requirement.
Correct.
So that's just in the back of your mind.
Correct.
I think we have to look at the specific zones.
But what if you have a house and you have the bedrooms to accommodate 3 cars, but you don't have the parking? Then maybe you can say, we can only have so many cars. There are STRs that will say, it may be a big house and a big family staying there, but they may say, you can only have 3 cars or whatever the number is. And that's up to the owner to talk to their renters. There's houses also that have huge driveways and all kinds of parking. And they may have everyone come in an individual car and they have the parking to accommodate it. So what if we just say off-street parking and they park what they can accommodate, the space they have? And we're not policing that.
So Deb, let me offer a slight modification to that, and I think it was Denise who had raised this. It might have been you, I forget, I apologize. Require all parking to be off-street, but have some language that says that this doesn't prohibit the owner of the STR from providing parking on another piece of property owned by them.
It's actually,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. John?
With all due respect, I still think we solve the issue by making certain areas resident sticker only like we have done in this neighborhood.
Okay. Would anybody else want to entertain that?
Well, I think, is that if I speak?
Yeah.
I think an area like Riverside, where they don't have off-street parking, then maybe we should consider Riverside to have a sticker for residents. But I think we have to look at it per zone, like look at these zones, and because it'll be on the agenda very soon. We're going to make another area where they have to have stickers besides over here because of the parking problems down there. But maybe there's certain congested areas where residents have to park on the street, then we do the stickers.
So what if someone on Riverside wants to have their family over?
Tickets.
Yeah, see, I can't live with that.
Yeah, we ticket them all.
But that's
Yeah.
going to be the same, so we're saying only the short-term rentals have to have off-street parking, but if you are a resident that lives in your house, then you can park on the street.
No, I
Is
think
that-
And what
there's
if,
a.
what if you have a
Yeah, I
graduation
agree,
party
I'm
or
just
something?
Yeah.
asking.
There's a difference between me, so right now, I'm in a residential zone, all my parking has to be in my driveway or in my garage, okay? If I have company over, they can park on the street, or if I have extra room in the driveway, they'll park in the driveway, but they can park on the street. If we put up resident parking only stickers in my neighborhood, then, and I have my daughter over, my wife, and I'm in the garage, that takes up all of our off-street parking. And my guests have no place to park. I don't think that's fair to the residents of the town.
So the restriction would only be for the short-term rental properties.
If we could carve a parking restriction like that, but I think personally, I think we're better off saying only off-street parking for STRs.
Right.
And, okay, is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
And, doesn't prohibit them from finding another place to use if they own that property.
The solution is simple. I mean, we do the same thing that what Newport does. May to October, 6 PM to 6 AM, resident sticker only parking. Or pick a time frame, 8 PM to 6 PM, whatever the case may be. Now, you've prevented the out-of-town STRs from parking on the street. You've guaranteed that the neighborhood has their on-street parking. And the only way for them not to get ticketed and stay overnight in a house is to have off-street parking.
But suppose a resident has a party till midnight.
Run the risk. I mean, you run the risk in Newport. If I live downtown on Spring Street between Pelham and Mill, and if I didn't have a sticker, they came right by, they chalk the tires or whatever, and then they come right back by and they slap a ticket on there. And if you don't pay it, then it winds up doubling. It's a revenue source for the town.
Do we even have that resource?
No.
I mean, the reality is, you're absolutely correct, Councilor Milbourne. Like, the police don't have the ability to go do that,
Right.
but at least you have the threat, and so ultimately that might deter however many people and cease the problem that we're running into in Riverside Drive. I mean, I feel like we're spending an awful lot of time
It's not
talking
only
about Riverside Drive.
I'm mentioning that because residents from there have come and spoke to us. It's not only there, but
So,
There's other areas.
there's
too.
other areas, I know there is down south.
So we need to find a lot of land that we can use as a municipal parking.
We have one,
Where?
right down here.
that's actually we permitted that to be used by the Harbor Commission for the boat.
You talking,
Yeah,
talking
that's,
about it back of Ed Dory?
Yeah,
yeah, that's for the,
that's
for
the
the
mooring.
dock,
For the moorings.
That's for the
Moorings.
morning.
Hold 7 cars.
So,
Seven.
John, I hear what you're saying. I don't hear others supporting that at this point in time anyway. So I'm going to suggest we move on. And I think with the others, we'll draft some language that
I just want to make sure I understand, so it's going to be off-street only?
Off-street
And allow
only.
them to have
Allow them to
a
have
lot
some-
anywhere, or whatever?
Right.
Somewhere else, okay.
Yeah.
So, you had something to say on that?
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, I can't wait to vote no on this thing when we finally get there.
Okay. So now the registration fees. So the language in the draft. Thank you, John. I appreciate that so much.
Needs to know.
I think, you seem to think that you have all the answers, so thank you very much for having all the answers. Right now, in the draft policy, it has a fee of $1,000 annually per dwelling unit. We heard a lot of feedback on that. So we did, two questions that are written here. Do we reduce the fee to a lower flat fee that is the same regardless of occupancy size of the STR? If so, what dollar amount? So does that 1,000 go down to something else? Do we set a tiered system based on the number of bedrooms? In the example given here, 1 bedroom, $250 annually, 2 bedrooms, $500, 3, $750, 4, $1,000, and then any above that, $100 per bedroom. And we've heard different variation of that discussed tonight, of having what I'll call a two-tiered system, an owner-occupied system, and we have to look at what we mean by owner-occupied and how we're going to make sure that that's accurate. And then a non-owner occupied. And I think that gets to your question, I believe it was earlier.
I think mine was reflecting on corporations and the fees for corporations.
Right, and I don't know that we could set a separate fee for corporations because of that same reason.
Still a person.
Right, but we could set different tiers for non-owner occupied
Right.
versus owner occupied. Denise, and then John?
All right, so it's just an idea. Owner occupied, $100. And then I just want people to know that if we decide that these short-term rentals have to be inspected yearly, the fire alarms, well, that's what this fee is for. It's to help us do that. So that's why if you own a lot of them, you're gonna pay more, because we have to send the fire marshal out there. We have to, if we decide to do it every year. So I think owner occupied should be about 100, because I think it's gonna be less that we need to worry about. that.
Flat fee?
Flat fee. And then I think 1,000 is a little much,
I think that's too big of
right? So I'm thinking
How much
500.
how much do the owners get charged by the companies? To, like, for instance, Airbnb, how much they charge?
It's a percentage.
Yeah,
Okay. Do we know that percentage?
it ends all differently,
A little
right?
different.
Yeah,
So Warwick, just, you know, Warwick.
what they
sorry.
do.
Warwick is $250 per, it's a permit registration fee per year for $250 per year for each dwelling unit covered under the provision. So it's $250 flat for each dwelling unit, as an example. Some people do it by bedrooms.
I think owner, see, this is how I'm looking at this, and I've heard from residents who are renting out a small area in their house, or a little.
Right.
They're doing that, and I hope I'm not gonna insult anybody, it's people retired that have a big home, and they're renting it out to help them survive, to help them pay their mortgage or pay their expenses. I think those people are usually the ones that are owner occupied, that I'm hearing. So I think $100 is fair for them. And we might wanna go lower, but I think
it.
100.
It covers the.
It covers whatever we need to do. I could go for I think 1,000 is too much
For which piece are you talking about?
for others. So-
Non-owner.
So it'd be two
Non-owner.
tiers.
Okay.
So if you're not owner occupied, I think you pay a flat fee of, and I just suggested 500, but I'd go lower if people could tell me a reason why.
250.
We just have to keep in mind that if we require these inspections, then we need to be able to pay for those.
So I just want to remind the council, as it is set up now, these are going to be granted by a special use permit. So a special use permit also requires a fee and application and advertising. So there's a fee for that. I don't know exactly off the top of my head what that fee is, but it's not cheap to get a special
Right.
use permit. I will admit that the special use permit is somewhat unique in that I think there was a testimony from a woman, and she was absolutely right. Special use permits go with the property. Most communities that do this say, we're going to permit them in this district as a matter of right, and therefore you can have a short-term rental as a matter of right. The reason why we went with a special use permit was because we wanted to give the neighbors an opportunity to comment on it. So that's the balance we have to check. So not only is there an annual fee under this ordinance, there's a application fee to get a special use permit. And there's no guarantee you're going to get a special use permit by the zoning board. So it's a two-step process as we have it set up right now.
And we have no idea what that fee is.
I think it's,
So could it be a fee plus
I
the
can recall.
advertising?
say that again?
Could it be a fee plus the cost of advertising? And I ask that because you could have somebody who's gonna have a property next to the Villages of Mount Home Bay. You might have, how many have we done there? Like,
$16,000.
yeah.
Somebody, honest to goodness. Somebody had to pay that because you have to do special mailing to every resident.
Right.
It's out of control.
That's
Just
by
my,
state- that's state law.
just my
That's
personal
state law,
opinion.
So you can't set a fee that would cover all the advertising for somebody who may only have to advertise $150.
Usually it's a fee plus advertising.
Okay,
Why,
that's-
why do
that's-
we need to do a special use permit?
Because right now, that's the only thing we're allowed to by law.
So we either do a special use permit, which allows the abutters to be notified, or we permit it by right, which doesn't allow, per zone, which doesn't allow abutters to be notified and have their input necessarily, or we don't allow it anywhere.
Or
Those
the
are kind of,
licenses, if the licensing bill passed, that also has an advertising requirement with notice. But right now, the best way to notify people is through zoning, and it is only special use permit. So if you go as a matter of right, there's no notification. So that's why we went special use permit. But that
But-
was a choice of the
But
council.
if,
Sorry.
but if these places have been in business and we have not had complaints, to go through, I mean, the ones who are, these businesses without complaints, we have to have them go through all of that cost of a special zoning? That's just ridiculous.
Right,
And-
so we could limit it per zone. Like by right in certain zones.
Certain zones and by special use permit
And
and
by
others,
special use permit in other zones.
or not permitted at all. There's your three choices.
Well, I don't know how many short-term rentals are up way north, okay? Like in those real congested areas. I haven't heard if there's a lot. It's usually, like you said, on the water or down in this area. So, I don't even know where I was.
so I'm going to bring us back to, we're talking about the registration fee right now. And we have the current language of 1,000 annually, flat. The suggested language on the right of a tiered system. That's just one tier, everybody. Denise's suggestion of flat fees of 100 and 500, owner versus non-owner. And then the other suggestion of doing a two-tier, one owner tier, owner-occupied tier, and one non-owner occupied tier. I would, go ahead, I'll opine in a minute. I'll go to John.
So, one thing that I haven't heard mentioned here, obviously we know that Uncle Sam always wants his piece of everybody's income. But in the tax code, if I were to say go on a 2-week vacation, I am allowed by right under the IRS tax code to rent my property, my primary residence out for 2 weeks, and that is not taxable income according to the Internal Revenue Service. So if that's the case, I have an issue with us throwing out fees to create an STR when even the federal government isn't going to take their piece of my 2 weeks a year.
That's a separate issue.
Yeah.
That's a tax issue. That's
Correct, it's a tax issue, but it directly relates to us slapping fees out there, because again, if I can do it and the federal government doesn't care for 2 weeks, why does the town of Tiverton?
They're two separate issues.
You're doing it for 2 weeks, short-term rentals can do it for the entire year.
I understand that, but wouldn't that a 2-week rental of my primary residence is a short-term rental, is it not?
If it's allowed in your community,
If it's allowed, yes.
is that the best way to put it?
Yeah. Denise, you had some?
I just had an idea. So you only have to do a short-term rent, a special use permit once.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So the first year you do it,
Hold on a second. Can I just say, yeah, yes. The way the ordinance is written, however, we require special use permits, which I do believe goes with the land, but we also have another, we say special use permit, plus you have to have an annual inspection. And if you don't get the annual inspection, or if you fail your annual inspection, you lose you lose the special use permit. So
Okay.
and I'm gonna be honest with you, that's a little shaky from a
Right.
legal perspective, but that's where we are.
so what I'm thinking of is the first year when you apply for your special use permit, there's no fee. And then, that first year. And then every consecutive year, then we put the tier system in. So that they're not paying this absorbent, like, get yourself established with the special use permit and everything you have to do around that. And then when the next year kicks in, that's when the fees start. That would be a way so that they don't have to spend additional money on top of the special use permit. I personally don't like the special use permit idea, quite frankly, but if we're gonna go that way, because we have to at this point, I
We don't
think.
have to, it's just, that's how we initially set it up, to provide notice to other residents. But it's not required. You could just say that they're permitted in certain zones, not permitted in other zones, so then there's no really.
Right, and in my opinion, once we put this all together, we have to have public hearings again. Okay. So then, you know that we're allowing it in your zone. Well, then I feel you need to come here and give us your opinion at that time. Say, no, we can't have it, and give us the reasons why. And that is your time to speak. Because a lot of times, we say this, that people have the right to come, but they don't. They only show up to complain that all of a sudden this is happening, and they weren't aware that they could have come and spoke. People don't pay attention to us very much unless there's a problem. Like, let's admit it. So, I feel that if we do it per zone, and then we have to have public hearings, and if you don't come to this meeting and speak up, well, that was your time to speak. And that's why, and then we don't have to have special use permits. That's how I feel.
You
So,
would have to determine what.
We'd
zones.
have to determine what zones. And we might determine every zone, right? We might do that. And then we'll have a meeting in the auditorium and welcome the whole town to come if they'd like. But the problem is they don't. They only come when all of a sudden they realize, oh my God, there's a short-term rental on the side of me. So that's and I really think even with the special use permits, we're not gonna have a lot of people come, I'll bet you. People
like-
don't pay attention to this unless they have a problem. Which,
Jay?
I'm not blaming them, people are busy, they have busy lives.
Jay, and then John, and then Deb.
I don't particularly have a problem with doing this by zone. I am absolutely opposed to making it by right anywhere. And the reason I say that, if you do it by right, then me as an abutter, you just pull my teeth. I can complain all I want, and I'll be told, nope, they can do it by right. And I don't want to go there. Also, there's got to be a way to divorce, in this particular case, the special use permit from the land. There's got to be. I don't know what it is. Maybe the state will do it for us, but, you know, this business of...
We get creative because we say special use permit plus the annual registration, and if you don't have it, then you
Well,
lose it.
yeah,
But that, honestly, I have to advise you that is unique, because special use permits, that person was right, special use permits run with the land, that's what the special use permit is.
Well, this is what my concern is. Joan owns an STR. She's not a good operator. She has college kids there every night. They whoop, they holler. I don't like it. I complain, I complain, I complain. You go down, you send the police down there, and they cure the problem for that night. Special use permit's been satisfied, the problem just went away. Tuesday night, happens again, same thing, same thing, same thing. There's gotta be a way to take that special use away for a period of time.
It would be, but
We attempt to with this ordinance, we say if you have violations and whatnot, we do.
And, you know, so what are violations? Well, police visitations, obviously. I think also the fact that your designated representative or yourself doesn't respond. That should be one of those violations. And I also think that those violations, the building official, the zoning official should not determine the violation. They should be in black and white. You know, none of this, they may, or they should, will and shall.
Did I say John or Deb now? I forgot. I think John was
Either one.
next.
I'll just be really quick here. This fee we're talking about? This is a inspection fee, is that what I heard?
It's a registration.
Registration,
fee.
okay, because if it's an inspection fee, my question would be, how are we going to inspect and with what resources? Because I know the building officials behind, the fire marshal's behind, everybody's behind. I mean, we just talked about, we can't even have the police come down and enforce sticker parking because we don't have enough resources. So I'm curious as to what, like,
So,
the enforcement's gonna cost.
Yeah, let me give a two-part answer. From my perspective, it's more than that. It is a fee that I, as a business, am paying to register my business with the town under the whatever ordinance that we devise. Some of that fee will help offset largely fire and safety inspections. And I think we would have to figure out, depending on how many we find. Right now, I did look at the DBR web, now there's more. There's.
It was 41 a little while
Well,
ago.
I was individually counting without pulling up the Excel sheet. So I pulled up the Excel sheet. There's 52 on the Department of Business Regulation website about, and I only did a quick look, it looks like about 8 of those are above 24. And
So-
they're scattered.
So with that then, because if it's gonna go to offset fire and safety inspections, again, I ask what resource are we gonna use? Because again, I talked to the fire marshal today, and the fire marshal is underwater on stuff that he has to do without adding this to his plate. So if we add this and we have to do these fire and safety inspections, like, do we need to go hire another fire marshal, and at what cost?
Denise?
This has been discussed, and the town administrator, I think it came up at one of the meetings, we'd have to hire someone else, a part-time, and that's what I was saying. That's what these fees would be, to offset that. There's also agencies we could hire to go and do this once a year. The price of that, we'd have to look into what would be the cheapest way to do this. But that's what I was saying to you, these fees would pay for that. It's not that we're going to put it in the general fund and use it to offset taxes. We're going to use it to maintain what this ordinance is saying we need to do. And yes, we've talked about it. We are going to have to hire someone or some entity to do these inspections.
We're gonna be looking to hire somebody regardless of this.
Yeah, we're going to have
We're
to
swamped.
anyway.
I understand.
Okay, so adding this to that planner is not that big a deal. But it would help to have a revenue stream to help offset that, because the general fund that subsidizes the appropriation.
By the way, did I just hear we have 52 on the DVR website?
Yes.
Okay.
Registered, and it's entirely voluntary.
Deb?
Just a comment. I think that we all agree that these businesses are good for the town. We want small business. Renee just left, but we want small business. And I just don't want to make it so cost prohibitive for these people to run these little Airbnbs. So, some of them, they're not making a whole lot of money. Some maybe are, but like we just don't want to cost more than they're bringing in. And I think what people are bringing into the town is very valuable. I think that they're adding to the economy of the town. They're adding to the characters of the town, and I just don't want to cost people out.
So, go ahead.
No,
No,
go
no.
No, I was gonna ask you something private.
So, no, I'm going to step on Jay for a minute. Yes, there is some added value. I would agree with that. At the same time, I think we have to balance how these affect or would affect, if there was more significant growth, the quality of life in our neighborhoods. And for me, without fees that don't reflect that balance, it's going to create it has a strong potential to create an imbalance. And that has happened in other communities. So I think that's something we need to grapple with.
And I agree, I don't have an issue with fees, but like special use zoning, I just think that can make it cost prohibitive.
No, and it could It could. I mean, that's so separate from the fees, and again, there are no final votes here, so we're gonna go back at some point, once we put some semblance of structure together. And we might say, okay, well, we thought this would work, but no, that's not gonna work because of this, and we're gonna modify it. Jay, and then I have a suggestion. Or a question.
Well, this mostly has to do with fees and the reason for them. So I don't think anybody here would disagree that the purpose of zoning is to promote health, safety, and welfare. So let's concentrate on safety. So we have a business, which I don't think anybody's going to disagree is a de facto motel. The town adopts and enforces zoning regulations. To me, by extension, that means we're also responsible for the health and safety of people in town. If you go to a motel, you're going to see a nice placard on the wall. It's going to tell you what's inspected, and you expect that it's going to be safe. If you go to somebody else's house that is a STR, you should have the same reasonable expectation. It's been inspected. There's no significant safety hazards. There's a CO alarm. There's a smoke alarm. The stairs are safe. The doors work. You can get in and out in the event of a fire. Those things need to be inspected. And for my money, they need to be inspected on an annual basis, just like they would in any other rented sleeping area like a motel or an STR. And for that reason, we need to be able to cover the cost of that. We can make it, revenue negative. We don't want to make money off of this. We just want to make sure that we can pay for the service that is required to perform that job. I don't know what that number is going to be. It could be, we could develop a number and find out, oh my goodness, that's a little low, and we'll have to move it. But we need to inspect these places, we need to make sure they're safe, and we need to do it in such a way that the cost is reasonable, but then the cost doesn't just fall upon the town to absorb.
So we have a couple proposals out there. My suggestion is this, that we put on paper two things. First off, I think there's agreement that one tiered system for everybody is not what we want to do. Is that? Okay. So I'm going to suggest that the solicitor and I put together two comparisons. One, flat fee, owner-occupied flat fee, we'll put the 100 down there. Non-owner occupied flat fee, 500. Then the second option, and doesn't mean we're limited to these options, these are just for discussion purposes later. Owner occupied per rented bedroom, and I think that's important that we have to state, and we're not clear on that yet. So if I have 3 bedrooms and one is in a separate section of the house and that's the one I'm renting, I should only be charged for that bedroom, not for whatever I'm using for my family. So per rented bedroom, for 1 bedroom, 100, 2 bedrooms, 2, 3 bedrooms, 3, 4 bedrooms, 4, above that 25 per extra bedroom. Owner occupied, this is owner occupied. Non-owner occupied, using the same formula that's written on the paper. So 1 bedroom, 250, 2 bedrooms, 500, 3 bedrooms, 750, and 4 bedrooms, 1,000, above that $100 per extra bedroom. So unless there's a desire to have further decision on that piece tonight, we can put that on a future agenda for this. Deb?
Can we get an estimate? Can we get an estimate of what it would cost to inspect?
Good point.
I can get that for you. You want it now?
No, not now, I'm just saying, we're throwing all these numbers out, and maybe it's gonna cost $100 to inspect, maybe it's gonna cost $500, we don't really know.
That's why I said we don't know.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
well,
I'll get you that. I'll
yeah.
have the fire marshal.
So we'll do this for now, and then we'll add a discussion again. I still think 1,000 is too high, but
I do too.
we can,
No, they might think that tonight.
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what they're making, it's what, it's, in my opinion. I know these people are gonna make money, and that's what they're doing, and that's okay. As long as they comply to our regulations and they run a community-friendly business. I don't think we should worry about what they're making. I think we should worry about what it's costing us to inspect and do that. That's just my
Yeah,
opinion.
And I would say it's a little bit more than that. It's also trying to have some level of control over the numbers that we have in town.
Okay, yes, maybe, yes.
Okay, so we okay with putting that in abeyance until future? All right. Local representative, I think, we've heard loud, we don't require that to be in Tiverton, but we do want to require that they have a response time of an hour or less
On the phone, right?
on the phone. What if they have to be here? What if I am the representative and I live in Western Mass and there's an emergency and I'm the one who has to be here?
So what if you just?
What emergency would that be?
Fire.
Yeah,
Yeah,
But
so
I don't know if
what are
you,
what are
right,
you
but
gonna
it
do
doesn't
if
matter
you
if you
come?
get here an hour or 2 hours, the house is going down anyway,
Um,
or not.
all of the renters have been arrested for whatever reason at the house.
Well, you don't need to make bail, so.
Unless they're your family.
So the police lock it up and
I don't know that you have to be here, just to respond, so you know what the issue is, and.
Then I guess my question is, why would we have a response time? Because if I give my
Because-
cell phone, you can call me.
yeah, but you have to call within an hour.
Right, we don't want you to
So,
call 2 weeks from now.
This is what happened, the police were there, this is just one incident, police were there, trying to get the owner, and there was something going on in the house too that was wrong. And they never answered. So if I respond in an hour and the police say, you need to be here, or you need to tell us what to do, as long, I'm sure if an owner gets a phone call and the police said, your house is on fire, you need to get here now, they're gonna get here. But I don't know if they have to come to the house, unless the people in charge there determine that.
It's not a responsible party that can answer the call.
So we'll write it up that way, 1 hour or less. Minimum, I'm sorry, John?
So just to expand on that, I would agree with Counselor Burke that there is no need to have a response time, and I'll share a very quick anecdote. When I rented an apartment in Newport, I rented it from somebody who may or may not be building a monster amount of housing units in this town, and I would be damned if I could ever get that guy on the phone, short of, leave him a voicemail and there's water flying, water shooting out of the wall. So, if we don't have that requirement on renters, the response time feels like it's just over-regulation for the sake of over-regulation.
That's been asked that was a suggestion of the town administrator, the police department, the fire department, the building department. They need to talk to someone that owns this house. And because these are short-term rentals, maybe be there two nights. So renting a house is different. But the police, this has been a suggestion of the police, fire, everyone who needs to be there also.
And from some of the constituents who have provided letters and the like. And I would just clarify, John, I wasn't saying no response time. I was saying I don't think a phone response time is adequate. I think an in-person response time is what's needed. So I was disagreeing with the phone response time.
Oh, okay, so you're going the other direction with it, okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be the owner.
Right,
They can have a property management group.
right, and we say that in there.
But-
This little blurb doesn't specify that, but in
We
the actual
don't want to
document.
have something going on that needs to be resolved, and the owner could do it very quickly,
So,
including evicting the tenant.
so just out of curiosity with that, and again, I don't know because I don't own a property management company, but is the expectation that like it's 2:30 in the morning Like, I'm going to pick up the phone and somebody is going to have to respond within an hour, or what?
Yeah.
Or there's gonna be a fine.
So
There's
it
gonna be
came,
a
it
fine.
came from a house down the south end of town that was being rented out, I think it was nightly at the time. It was different people. The neighbors were complaining. They go down, the police go down there, hear from the, the people who are there renting. The next day you go, there's a whole different group of people there, same issue, different party, different group, but nobody can tell you who the owner is. You try to look up the property, it's a corporation. To come to find out, the person was in North Carolina. But it took us 4 weeks to find them. I mean, that's
And
just
meanwhile,
wrong. I mean,
this
now
was
they have a
still going
registration.
on.
I get it, now they have a registration process, but it is what it is. So there needs to be a responsible party that can answer a call that there's a problem on your property. Whether it's a
If I
registered
owned-
agent or yourself, it doesn't matter. Somebody needs to be able to answer the call.
I think it makes sense, but I think if the police calls the property owner or the fire marshal, whoever it is, you need to come down. I think the property owner will come down. But I think they don't have to come down just for, they need an initial phone call first.
What we need is somebody to call the tenants and say, knock it off.
Yeah.
That's
So-
what we need. Please.
So I actually have a suggestion then, and I say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but perhaps it is the direction the council would want to go. Why don't we take the, Dubai method, where if you want to operate a STR in the town of Tiverton, you are required to have the registered agent be a party that lives in Tiverton, and that person gets a cut of the profits or whatever the case may be. Like in Dubai, if I want to open a business in Dubai, I have to have a registered agent that's from Dubai and make that a business.
Well, we had suggested that they live in Tiverton, and we got feedback from some of the owners that that was too restrictive. And second, not sure we can do what Dubai does in terms of requiring that cut of the profit.
We got an attorney Marcello here. He can make it happen.
So,
I
yeah.
to Dubai to study it.
So so again.
Sold. I'll go with you.
What I'm hearing is, at least for the majority, straw poll, if you will, we want to move that to 1 hour or less minimum by phone. We'll come back with some language on that. We have 10 minutes left in our
We've done
time.
pretty well, though.
We've done pretty well. We haven't fully tackled whether or not we do want to do the special use and/or which zones. I think that's a one for another night, and I think it'll give us time to really look at the zones again, think about all the discussion that we've had and the other feedback that we've received. We can either go to the next item, which is trash recycling, or we can end early, whichever the preference of the council would be.
So I just want to point out, I believe it was Newport. So Newport has the most experience with this because they had the most influx, but they had it, I don't think by special use permit, they had it by a permit fee, but then they recently banned it in all residential zones. So that's something that, if you look at that map, there are not many other zones other than residential in the town of Tiverton.
Correct.
So your choices are limited.
Yes.
So just to let you know that. And obviously, no offense to people who don't live on the water, but I would assume, again, what I said is true. Most people who have short-term rentals live on the water or close to the water
Or within sight.
or within sight of the water. But I could be wrong
There's
on
a few
that.
in this area.
Yeah, maybe like the hills.
Yeah, and some of the ones that I saw listed up in above 24 tend to be on the higher
And
elevation.
then some people might like the proximity to Newport anyway, but, so I'm just pointing that out. But if you're going to limit it by zone, you don't really have a lot of choices.
Right.
So just keep that in mind.
Right.
And the zoning map that it's online and in the clerk's office is the most up-to-date, legal, and valid zoning map that we have.
So do we want to address trash recycling, or want to end now and come back at this at a future date?
I think trash recycling is a big,
I would say, yeah.
I say and now too.
Okay,
yeah. And now see what we've got. And
okay.
John doesn't
And then
do that, but I do.
at one of our next meetings, we can set a future date?
Yeah, on Monday, we'll set a future date, because we have to worry about,
Add that to the agenda for Monday.
yeah, add that to the agenda. But, you know what, also add budget meetings to the agenda also. There's a lot of meetings we have to do.
Right.
So we're gonna have to talk about that on Monday.
Special meetings, you mean?
Yeah, there's gonna be. Our first budget is April 15th, that meeting. All right, go ahead. No, you do it. You're running it. Give me a break tonight.
Anybody have any other last-minute pieces on this? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. John?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor?
I'm sure Dennis will
Yeah.
agree.
Dennis by proxy.
Dennis will adjourn.
Thank you.
You can stay.
Yeah, you didn't get the vote, so you have to stay.